The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone. My name is Ana Rojas, and it is a pleasure to be today's moderator for the Gender and Energy Nexus in Urban Settings webinar. We are still waiting for several of you to be able to log in. We have quite an important number of registrants for today's webinar, so we want to ask you to please wait and bear with us for a couple of minutes while we give them the opportunity to join. So stay tuned. We'll get started in a couple of minutes. Thank you. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone. My name is Ana Rojas, and I will be today's moderator to the Gender and Energy Nexus in Urban Settings webinar. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this Agent Energy series of webinars. I want to also take a moment to thank you for tuning in today for today's webinar, as well as our panelists for being on board and sharing with us their experiences and knowledge on gender in urban settings. Before we get started, I just want to share with you a few housekeeping matters. First, as you have seen, those of you who have tuned in today are on mute mode. This is to avoid disturbances. However, this doesn't mean that you are excluded from the conversation. Quite the opposite. I want to invite you to please use the chat box function on your go-to platform a tool towards the right side of your screen. Please feel free to send in your questions and comments throughout the whole webinar and specify the name of the speaker that you want to address the question to. Today, I have both my colleagues, Maria Preble and Jamie Wen, behind the screens. They'll be helping us with any technical difficulties that we may or could encounter. If you have questions, please also use the chat box function to reach out to them. They will be collecting, as I said, the questions that you have throughout the webinar, and we will be compiling them and sharing during the Q&A section of the webinar. There will be handouts available, so please do keep an eye on the chat box. And before you ask, yes, this webinar is going to be recorded and the recording is going to be made available together with the PDF versions of the presentations you're going to see. So do give us some time after we're done with today's webinar so that you can have access to the material online. Now, it is a pleasure for me to introduce you also, in case you don't know, to the Agent initiative, which is a program launched by USAID in order to increase the effectiveness of environmental programming through robust gender integration and improve gender equality and women's empowerment outcomes in a broad range of environmental sectors. One of the sectors that Agent works in is the energy sector, where the work is targeted towards filling knowledge gaps and sharing best practices, encouraging documentation of experiences and creating new knowledge. And this is one of the reasons why we have developed this series of webinars, and we find it a very important tool for knowledge sharing. Today's topic, as you know, is on the nexus of energy and urban settings, which is something that tends to fall off the radar, if you allow me to say that. So we're very happy to be able to discuss today with you about the gender considerations that one has to take on board, particularly when you're designing, for example, not only projects, but also policies for urban areas. We're also going to explore activities that can ensure that energy intervention can address the needs of women and men and also be part of their income generation activities. And also what kind of trends may affect and inform the work of utilities or those companies working on increasing energy access in urban settings. In order to do this, we have a great panel. We're going to get started with Mariëlle Feenstra, who's going to share with us her reflections on the gender and energy policy research she's doing, and particularly putting it into the context of urban settings. She's going to be followed then by David Mann, who's going to be sharing with us experiences from Jamaica in terms of electrification and the use of Ready Board in a pilot project. We're going to then jump continents and move to Kenya, Africa, where Claire Baker is going to share with us the experiences that they have in livelihoods in terms of both increasing energy access, but also generating opportunities for young women and men to increase their formal labor opportunities. And finally, Intabi Mola Kwana is going to share with us her research on informal food sector and how we cannot forget about the gender considerations that are part of the informal food sector, but also the urban settings. And we're going to close then, followed with what I'm very sure is going to be a rich conversation and discussion, thanks to the questions that we're expecting you to post. So if you're interested in our work and the work of Agent, and particularly its energy sector, here are the emails of those of us you can reach out to. And also you can follow us on Twitter on Agent _USAID, or go to the green platform in which your URL is found on the slide, so that you can look into all the resources that we have been able to compile in our research center. So with that note, I would like to get us started on the content of today's conversation and invite Mariëlle Feenstra to the table. Mariëlle wrote the first ever thesis on gender-aware energy policy with case studies from Uganda and South Africa as a university Twente master's students in 2002. Inspired by an internship at the United Nations Development Food for Women UNIFEM program, she became a research assistant of Professor Dr. Jay Clancy, focusing on gender and energy. For Energia, she compiled the first ever annotated bibliography on gender and energy. As a PhD candidate, she will continue her academic work on gender-aware energy policy, focusing on stakeholder participation in the policy process cycle. Mariëlle, it is a pleasure to have you on board. You know, I've said this before, we quote you everywhere when we're talking about gender and policy, and we're very much looking forward to this new conversation on policies in urban settings.
Yes, thank you very much, Anna, for your introduction and your welcoming words. I'm very pleased with this invitation to share my research and to bring my policy perspective to the gender and energy nexus. My background is in public administration and public policy, and my research is focusing on how gender-aware energy policy can be developed and designed. For the context of this presentation, I'm focusing on gender and energy policy in an urban setting. And therefore, if we're looking at gender and energy, it is not only a question for the South, it's a global commitment. And as you will see in my presentation, I will use quite some examples from the global north, and especially the European Union, where gender and energy is a very interesting topic that needs more research as well. Gender and energy is serving a couple of SDGs. I pointed out here 6, and gender is an interlinking interlinking topic that is serving more than one SDG, and I really encourage everyone who is working on SDGs to look through SDGs from an intersectional perspective. Developing a gender-aware urban energy policy design comes with several issues to take into consideration. Urban energy policy through a gender lens has 2 main focus points: household energy and urban mobility. Looking at that, we can develop and design urban energy policies focusing on the availability, accessibility, affordability, safety, security, and sustainability. For example, the accessibility of household energy between men and women might not be the same. Energy poverty has a very strong gender dimension that I will point out later in my presentation. Urban mobility, for example, is, especially if you look at public transport, an issue between men and women concerning safety and security. Women are using more public transport than men in the European Union, at least, and safety and security is has a different meaning for women and men. So all these elements, all these parameters need to be taken into consideration when developing a gender-aware urban energy policy. What about the process of engendering a policy? There are several phases and stages that needs to be taken into consideration, and it's an ongoing dynamic process, which is a cycle, a loop, where evaluation and monitoring is very important. In my research, I'm focusing on the policy formulation and agenda setting and design, so the first 2 stages. And of course, the policy implementation comes up with recommendations feeding into the policy formulation and the policy design. There are enabling conditions and drivers, as you can see in my slide, that have different impacts on how to engender an energy policy. Let's take this conceptual approach to a case study. Gender and urban mobility, for example, is a topic that is surveyed through the European Union on a yearly basis, and they discovered, since they are surveying since 1991, that there is a gender difference in urban mobility, and they came up with quite some interesting statistics and gender disaggregated data about it. I like to use, for example, the fact that female drivers have a more positive attitude to travel regulations, and are committed fewer traffic offenses, and are also involved in fewer road accidents. What you see also that the use of public of mobility is different between men and women are more depending on public transport. This gender difference brings into account a different use of urban mobility, and that concept is more developed by the Danish scholar Kierlof, who is making a distinction between mobility as why, how, when, and where do people go to, and what are transport, for example, flight, towards motility, the individual capacity to be mobile. And there you see a gender difference. And understanding this motility and the transport patterns and mobility is very fundamental for developing gender-sensitive policies. So having gender-segregated data on these patterns, evidence-based research can feed into developing and creating and designing gender-sensitive policies to overcome gender inequalities in the urban setting. Mobility is one issue of gender and energy in an urban setting. Another one is, of course, energy access, and then energy household, and then focusing on household energy access. Think about heating, cooling, electricity, energy input for cooking. It may come as a surprise to know that gender and energy, that there is a gender dimension to energy poverty in the global north. Out of the 3 million people living in energy poverty globally, internationally, there are people in Europe still living in energy poverty, and even some households are using fuel wood and firewood for cooking and heating their house. Together with Professor Joy Clancy and Dr. Victoria Daskalova, we did a research report on the gender perspective on energy access, which is publicly available. And there we discovered that one out of 7 houses in the European Union are living in full poverty. So there's a strong need to develop a gender-aware energy policy, even in the European Union. This is looking from an urban setting to energy poverty. Men and women are having quite some different use and different use of energy, but are also living in different housing conditions. So looking from energy poverty through a gender dimension, you see that, for example, women are earning less than men. They also live longer than men, so they live longer in poverty, and within the European Union, they are overrepresented in social housing, and social housing can be sometimes be very energy inefficient. So the energy poverty comes with gender dimension to that. There are several energy poverty definitions. I quoted here one, the search for an energy poverty definition that is globally accepted and adapted by policymakers is not an easy one. It needs to give input from the context and cultural dimensions as well. So you see there's sometimes a more metric approach to energy poverty, and also there are consensual or outcome-based approaches towards energy poverty. Gender and energy poverty in an urban setting comes with 3 interlinked perspectives. You have economic one, as I briefly mentioned before, the low income and the income disparity, the income gap between men and women, but this also comes with biological and physiological differences. For example, Eurostat, the Statistic Bureau of the European Union, came up with a report that the poorest, the 4 countries, Portugal, Greece, Ireland, and the UK, the countries with the poorest housing conditions in an urban setting, and they also demonstrate the highest excess winter mortality. And if you look at the excess winter mortality statistics, there is a gender dimension to it. Also, the sociocultural dimension is very much important to look at gender and energy poverty. If I wrap up my presentation, I can come up with the following recommendations for developing and creating a gender-aware urban energy policy. The first one comes from my background as a policy advisor for the municipality. You have to think globally, but act locally. Involve the municipalities, involve all levels of decision making to develop this gender-aware urban energy policy. Break the silos. Often you see that energy poverty, for example, is an issue of the poverty eradication policy makers that are more in the social policy levels, where energy policy is not focusing enough on the issue of energy poverty, and but are focusing on how to improve energy efficiency in housing. So, for example, to tackle urban energy policy from a gender perspective, you need to involve social affairs department, the housing department, the energy efficiency department, and those 3 all need to be interlinked and intertwined. The focusing on urban energy policy is often, especially in the north, on the energy transition. And there are quite a lot of energy efficiency pilots and projects, but we need to be very aware of what I call the Matthew effect on energy transition. The poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer, meaning that those who are, for example, home owners and can invest in energy efficiency measures do get the benefit of subsidies and grants from the local governments or national governments. But if you're poor and you're renting a house, you have less options. And this is a very strong gender dimension as well. So to end up with my conclusion, we need more gender disaggregated data on energy use in an urban setting, not only looking at household energy, also looking at mobility issues, and not to have that gender disaggregated, but also to go beyond the household as one entity. A household is a fluid concept, and we need to integrate that, and we need to look beyond the household entity to see who is the end user, to come up with demand-driven energy policies and not longer focusing on the supply side of an energy policy. So thank you for listening to me, and I'm really looking forward to have the discussion with you on gender-aware energy policy in an urban setting.
Hi, Mariëlle, thank you very much. It's been extremely interesting listening to you, and particularly not only the last points that you were making about the links with gender and policy making, but it really spoke also the link with subsidies and how we take for granted, again, that subsidies may or may have positive effects in the community as a whole, while there are different elements that actually affect the fact of whether or not you can benefit from them. And with that note, I want to invite all our audience to send in their comments or questions to Mariëlle. And please remember to send us very clear questions so that we can, when we read them, it is clear to our presenters what it is that you're really looking for. Without further ado, I really want to invite and introduce David Mann today. He is an urban development practitioner currently working with USAID in Jamaica. His hands-on experience in East Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean has ranged from energy efficiency and land use planning to urban agriculture and participatory slum operating. Through his work advising urban authorities and community leaders, he has developed a skill for recognizing where USAID programs connect, whether that is environmental protection with health programming or citizen security with disaster risk reduction. David, it's a pleasure to have you today with us, and we're very much looking forward to hearing about your experience in Jamaica.
Thank you very much, Maria. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. This is David Mann. As I was already introduced, I'm an environment officer here in the USAID Jamaica office. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about the Ready Board electrification project, which was something we started in about late 2015, and it's going up until now. We're still running this project and still trying to gather the right data to understand how the impact of this pilot project has, what kind of impact it's had on the community. It's a dense, low-income, informal neighborhood of Kingston, and it's pronounced Majesty Gardens, for anyone who is wondering how to pronounce that in local patois. So thank you, everyone, for listening today, and I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation. First of all, Majesty Gardens is made up of around 1,600 persons, majority male, but not by many. The main economic outlet in the community or outside of the community, most people are employed in low-skill areas. There's some that are considered semi-skilled that usually work outside of the community. And then about 20% of the respondents run a home business, mainly around vending. Some charcoal for cooking is sold out of homes. There's a little bit of tailoring and ironing, and a little bit of farming and husbandry. We would have liked to have collected more data on gender disaggregation at the initial stages of this project. We are still going back and trying to split some of these numbers through gender and sex. Electricity is our main focus. We aren't looking at the other energy sources at this time, but we know that the households are using almost everyone is using electricity for lighting, vast majority for television and cell phone charging. And there's a few irons and fridges out there. We know that the electricity is not necessarily being used extremely efficiently, partly because there's no one paying. At least before the project came, almost all connections were illegal. There were a few households that had no access to electricity whatsoever. And so we would come across cases in which the fridge was being left open in order to air condition the shack. You can imagine the efficiency of something like that. This is a small sample of some of the alleyways and lanes around Majesty Gardens. As you can see, very narrow. Concrete construction in some cases, but mainly it's going to be tin sheets or scrap wood. Of course, the defensible spaces from an urban design perspective, it's quite difficult to imagine a woman feeling very safe in these spaces, and lighting is often an issue. As it is in many informal areas around the world, informal urban areas specifically, street lighting is not provided by the city, and so many of the shack dwellers are using their own electricity, whether that's legal or in the case of the project, we're trying to get it to be legal electricity, but they're using their own lights outside of the home in order to illuminate at least the stoop just in front of the door. Our main issues that we're trying to tackle here are because these houses can not be wired to have normal wiring the way that some of us are used to, with outlets and light fixtures, etc. And so the people have made do. They have wired up speaker wire and all kinds of things that are crisscrossing inside the home, which of course provides plenty of space for risk and possible damage to equipment, especially when you don't have circuit breakers and you don't have anything protecting some of your sensitive electronics. So that sets you back even more if you have a damaged refrigerator, for example, because of short. But then there's also organized crime, which was the main avenue by which people were accessing illegal electricity connections, which would essentially come from the factory next door. A line would be run over the wall, and then that could be then split to many households. But in order to access that, you as a householder would have to pay a gang member or someone involved in organized crime, which then puts you in a vulnerable situation because you're not actually a customer of a utility company, but rather you are subject to whatever whims those persons may have. So we also think especially about the women that may be housed in these shacks and the ways that they may be having to stay home and either practice some sort of gainful employment or not, but the fact that they may be especially vulnerable to organized crime during the day. And so having access to a cell phone and communication is extremely important, and being able to charge your cell phone is of course extremely important. And these were identified as some of the issues by the community members when we did the initial survey in 2015. So the solution our project has proposed was what we call a ready board, and this is also used in some parts of Africa as a solution for communities or dwellings which do not have the ability to become wired in a traditional sense. And so this board has all the essential components on it. We've installed about 400 of them. It has lights, it has the necessary circuit breakers, it has outlets. And then there's also a long cord which has a safety lamp at the end, which that could be hung outside for street lighting. And then the idea is that customers are signed up as legitimate clients of the utility for prepaid metering, meaning that they are going to go and pay for credits ahead of time, and then those credits are going to be debited from their account as they use the electricity. We also did quite a number of campaigns to increase energy efficiency, to help folks understand, both men and women, that they can be empowered to reduce the amount of electricity they use so that they're not shocked by the amount that it costs now that they're becoming legitimate and paying customers to the utilities. Of course, the illegal connections also have been removed, and this is an important component of the whole project, and of course part of the reason why the utility supports us in these kind of endeavors is because an effort to get everyone in the community on board with regularization, and no longer are we going to be able to have these illegal connections. But I think it's an interesting component to look at from a gender perspective, because though it's not ideal, of course, there was an active energy access economy in Majesty Gardens before our project. But, you know, in many parts of the world, just like one person's misfortune is the opportunity for another. If you think about if anyone's been going down African roads and there's a flood up ahead that's stranding the motorists, well, now it becomes potential customers for nearby sellers. So in this case, also in Majesty, because people did not have access to legitimate electricity through the utility, there was an economy where you could pay someone to go put a wire up. And often those were men, young men would be paid to install these connect. The livelihood impact on these, what we might quote unquote say, service providers. And I think this would be an interesting additional dynamic to include in projects, is to understand who is being displaced when illegal access is being taken away, and how can those people be re-engaged. So We have trained some of the young men who we think were probably part of this, though they may not admit, part of this economy. We did train them to help assemble the ready boards, and hopefully they will be also available to do repairs to those ready boards if in future that's needed. We also had some good cases of some of the older residents in the community. This particular woman, whom we call Mama Gina, is also very proud to become a legal customer of the utility. She expressed hopefulness that by becoming a legitimate paying customer, she'd also be able to access other public and private services, because now there's a paper trail. This is now, you have a customer number, and you can perhaps use some of that information to then go to the office of another for social protection type of an agency, which can now recognize you and put you on a map, and that can help you access additional services. And other residents have also described a sense of dignity at being able to now demand a response from the utility company if there's a problem with their equipment or with the supply of electricity. And so this has really, I think, been a very positive aspect for many of the community members. And we didn't necessarily recognize this at the beginning of the project, but we have been able to bring some of these lessons out. And I think it's important for others to take on too. And finally, for the access, I mean, as I mentioned, this project really is about improving the access, but then also that this be paid access for the utility. And so what we've seen from recent company data on customers who have purchased power, it seems around 57% of the account holders are female and 43% are male. But this chart here is showing the amount of kilowatt hours which were purchased per month. It seems that 188 on average kilowatt hours for male accounts and about 222. So if we add together the fact that there are more female account holders, and also that females those account holders are of course consuming more, we are seeing that about 60% of all the electricity going into the community is being consumed by female account holders. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that those are females that are flipping the switch, because it's just a matter of who pays the bill. And so that's another area where I think we could look further in terms of who is in charge of the payment of the bill and who is in charge of perhaps doing the energy efficiency type lessons to the rest of the household. And we do have an extra action community survey that's coming up in the months of July and August. And so we will be looking at the household acceptance and some of the feedback on the design of our ready board, hoping to also understand some of the attitudes towards the utility and the willingness to pay. And we also, of course, want to look at the household consumption habits. And we didn't do probably as much as we should have at the beginning of collecting data disaggregated by gender, but we hope to get the household consumption habits also by gender. And then also ultimately understanding whether or not the community members understood the purpose for our project. And so I think these are areas in which we can continue to understand. As the last presenter made the point, it's important that we look at that we collect the right data so that subsequent projects can be designed better. And like I mentioned, this was a pilot. So of course we've learned a lot, and we will be able to roll this out. With the utility here in Jamaica, we'll be able to roll this out in other communities. I thank you very much for your attention, and that's all I have now, but I look forward to the future presenters. Thank you.
Thank you, David. It's been really interesting listening to you and the journey of, just starting with this pilot and then figuring out throughout which are the very different gender dynamics that come into the mix when you want to electrify informal settings. I want to invite our audience to please send in their questions, and please help us make this a very lively conversation towards the end. We want to hear from you, so do not keep silent. And I want to now introduce you to Claire Baker, who's getting ready. Claire is the Director of Development for Livelihoods, the social enterprise providing life-changing products and opportunities through a last-mile distribution network that empowers slum communities to create jobs and improve their own quality of life. Claire has worked in Europe and East Africa, managing programs that promote access to a variety of rights, from disability access in France to renewable energy in Tanzania, and clean energy and employment opportunities in Kenya with livelihoods. She is the primary fundraiser and partnership lead for livelihoods and is based in Nairobi, Kenya. Claire, the floor is yours, and we're very much looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here, and I hope everyone's having a great day or evening wherever you are in the world, and that you're enjoying the webinar. So as Anna has already said, my name is Claire Baker, and I work with Livelihoods. So I'm based here in Kenya, in the community that you actually see on the screen in front of you. I'm speaking from there right now. So if there's the noise of motorbikes or trucks or buses or cows, I do apologize. So Livelihoods is a non-profit social enterprise that recruits, trains and supports youth and women from urban and peri-urban slums in Kenya to distribute clean energy products in their communities. So we provide free training in sales, we provide long-term coaching and mentoring, and then we give products on consignment. So there's no need for our sales agents to buy products to sell. They're not taking on any risk. We give them products, they sell them, they earn an income, and in so doing, they become the change makers in their own communities. So how do we go about this? The first step is to recruit youth and women, and we do this through street-based scouting, through existing group structures, and through posters in the communities we work in. And then we provide this free, so cost-free, 3-week training in sales and marketing, also covering environmental awareness, technical knowledge of the products that we sell so that they know what they're talking about, and work readiness and life skills. So that's the softer skills that actually empower someone to be professional and to pursue their goals. Many of our trainers and local branch managers have actually been promoted from amongst our skilled, ambitious sales agents. And we're privileged to have such a motivated, empathetic and very energetic team, true to our name. Our branches, as you can see from this image here, are very simple. Basically, they are 4 walls, a whiteboard, some motivational images and messages, and stack loads of products to sell. That's products from clean burning cook stoves to solar lamps, water filters, eyeglasses, and household appliances. So these branches are where the magic happens. As you can see here, it's a training. We also have role plays and mentoring happening here. This is where our agents come to complain about customer rejections, where they settle internal disputes, or where they make teams to pitch in a marketplace in a peer group. You can't quite tell from the image, but more than half of our trainees and sales agents are women. And actually, majority of our staff are women, and our board as well. So as you can tell, it's a bit of a focus of ours, and I'll of course go more into this later. So where is their marketplace? Where are they selling these products? Basically, they sell in the informal settlements or slums that they come from. For example, here you see the Kawangware slum in Nairobi. That's where I'm speaking from right now. And then similar numbers, I mean, this has a population of in the hundreds of thousands, and similar numbers live in the sprawling informal developments around all the towns and cities where we have our 11 local branches in Kenya. Now, in these areas and across Kenya, thousands die each year from smoke inhalation, from carbon monoxide poisoning and fires, basically indoor air pollution. And dirty cooking is also one of the biggest culprits in climate change. in deforestation and in black carbon emissions, which is one of the most immediate causes of global warming. Of course, those who suffer the most are the women and children in these communities. They're the ones who spend the most time cooking, collecting fuel, and inhaling all these fumes and chemical compounds that can kill and systematically cause health and environmental damage. So that's where we come in. With a few steps, a livelihood sales agents can bring a clean cook stove that reduces emissions of CO2 by 50%, that reduces fuel expenditure by 50%, and even reduces cooking time by 50% or even more. But what makes women so successful? They are the most successful at selling these clean cook stoves and solar lamps. They're uniquely placed to influence other women in their communities and to bring peer-to-peer information that can affect decision-making at the household level, these small household energy decisions. So the men have the energy, the young men that also come for our training, they have the energy, but they're also taking their very first steps into the professional world. And this is probably a first step towards another job, or they get thirsty for something new, and they might move on to another opportunity, which we're extremely happy about when they do, and we support them in order to fulfill their full potential. But we find that the female sales agents certainly stay longer and make even more of this opportunity, hence why we focus on them deliberately. So with livelihoods, customers spend a small amount of money and they save a huge amount of money. Overall, we've saved customers over $14 million in charcoal or fuel, and we've taken the equivalent of more than 72,000 cars off the road. Or if you prefer, we've prevented 45,000 trees from being chopped down to prepare the daily food that powers Kenya's brilliant economy. This isn't such a colorful image, but it's getting down to brass tacks. This is our model. So we benefit the unemployed youth and women who we train as sales agents and provide with a sustainable commissions-based income. We then benefit the low-income consumers that we market to, and we benefit, of course, the promotion of clean energy as a sector. And it's all sustainable. Most of these beneficiaries are also women. That's 66% of our customers are women, 65% of our sales agents, 60% of our staff, and 85% of our board. So we've really integrated gender perspectives into our operations and marketing approaches at all levels. But we're not a women's organization that distributes clean energy products. In fact, we didn't even start out specifically targeting women at all, but youth, principally young men. So we're an organization for everyone, where women are encouraged and allowed to thrive on the same footing and to the same extent as men. We give people or communities the opportunity to get lively, hence our name, and earn a living whilst impacting the planet that they live on and the streets that they hang out in. So everybody wins, and everybody gets supported and gets the one-on-one attention that they need to thrive, from sales agents getting mentoring to customers getting after-sales support on their products. To date, from 2011, we've trained 1,500 women, and women have made up 90% of the top 10% of our sales agents. Let me just break that down because it's a lot of dry percentages and all you have to look at is an image. So that's 90% of the top 10% of sales agents. So that basically means that women are awesome in our organization. But it's not just us. There's also, as we know, a global realization across all sectors that without the inclusion and leadership of women, development can't happen. And this transition to clean energy from the bottom up can't happen because women are often the decision makers for cooking and household energy. In fact, in Kenya, specifically in urban slums, the majority or a large proportion of households are actually led by single mothers. So they are the ones making the decision. And they are also the ones that need to earn the daily bread for that household. If we exclude them from the job market and from this energy revolution, we are simply doing ourselves a disservice. So our co-founders, Tanya and Maria, didn't set out to create a women's organization, but they realized that women were doing much better than men at all levels and decided to make this a deliberate focus. So far, we've sold more than 30,000 cook stoves, or 30,000 clean energy products across Kenya, and we've expanded to 11 branches across the country in 9 different counties. We've proven that livelihoods can travel well and can be exported, and we are planning on continuing this scaling and expansion into neighboring countries. We've set our sights on Tanzania, Uganda, and why not even outside of Africa. So as I mentioned, the variety of products that we sell, the lively team we have, here they are to prove it, some of our team with the products. We work with major manufacturers to source products directly from the source, and we constantly introduce new innovative products that can provide the quality, service, and benefits that we want to provide to our customers. So here I'm breaking my own rule of not putting any text on my slides, just to leave you my contact details that I hope I can learn from your experiences. Feel free to reach out to me as a representative of Livelihoods. And I hope that you've gained something, and I hope you'll have some great questions based on the introduction to livelihoods and our gender and energy focus. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Claire. And yes, I think you've made a marvelous job of also showing us how the gender and energy nexus can be a positive drive for changing lives. And I'm very much also looking forward to the audience sharing their questions and comments with us. I want to invite now our last panelist, Ntabi Molakwana. She's a PhD, is a researcher in the field of energy policy and gender, working towards finding solutions that address and lead to the eradication of energy poverty experienced by women and men in low-income urban and rural areas in the global south. Ntabi, I see that you're ready to go, and so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna. Greetings to everyone. Today I will be presenting on the productive uses of energy and gender in the informal food sector in Rwanda, Senegal, and South Africa. This is a project that is funded by DFID, and it's part of the program run by Energia at the moment, which is the Gender and Energy Research Program. It's a 4-year project, and we are actually on our 4th year right now. Our project, we're doing it with I'm at the University of Twente, and we are the lead organization, and we are working on it with the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and Energy in Senegal, and Marge, which is a company that is doing research for us or with us in Rwanda. The project was, what we did was, it's divided into 2 phases. Okay, sorry, my slides are not moving forward. Okay, sorry about that. So we did the first phase of the project. So we started in 2015, and we conducted the first phase of the project on that year, where we conducted surveys and in-depth interviews, focus group discussions, and we also did quite an in-depth literature review, looking at how men and women in the informal food sector, or what people like calling the street food sector, how they use energy, and how modern energy services could impact on the type of use or needs that these men and women have in this sector. The important thing here was to gather evidence so that we can try as much as possible to influence policy. And now during this webinar, we're talking about urban settings. Just to highlight to you that what we did was to collect data from the urban centers of these 3 countries. So in South Africa, we went to Durban and Cape Town. With the first phase, we also touched on Johannesburg. And in Rwanda, it was we went to Kigali and another surrounding town or city. And then in Senegal, it was Dakar and Kaolack. So we collected all this data, and for us it was important to also gender disaggregate the data that we were collecting. So as you can see, during the second phase, we collected data from 751 enterprises where those were just the surveys, and for in-depth interviews, we went into 105 enterprises. We also continued with document analysis, and as we speak, we continue to analyze our data so that we can also close the project. From what we collected, you will see there that 63% of the people that responded to our questionnaires were female and 37% were male. Now, we didn't go out intentionally to collect data from more women than male. What our methodology approach was to go and collect data from settings, you know, in the most natural way, where you go to the market and you don't necessarily select men or women, but you select everyone that is there and that is available at that time. And as you can imagine, from country to country, it differs on who is where at a particular time. So what you see there is a true reflection of who was on the ground at that time when we were collecting the data. Now, the foci of our study, we're looking at entrepreneurship, energy, and gender, and how these come together, and you will see a bit of what we have analyzed. I mean, we could go on the whole day about this project and the results that we have, but I've just selected a few things just to highlight some of the results that we have so far. But why this type of research? Most importantly is the growing role for feeding Africa's growing urban populations. This is what we see as people get more and more economically involved. The energy prices are going higher, people do not have enough time to cook, and the informal food sector is getting more and more important for people that are relying on it for food, but also it's very important as an income generator for people in the global south. And you'll see that the sector provides between 50 to 75% of total employment and over 72% of non-agricultural employment in Africa, which is quite a lot. But we also know that it's not a sector that is readily acknowledged and accepted by many governments out there, because it's, you know, for a lot of governments, it's about formalizing the informal, so which for them is a sign of showing that the country is successful and is growing. But is this realistic? These are the questions that have come up, of course, in our research. We first went out to do energy research, but of course we couldn't ignore and avoid all the issues that have come out. Okay, just to go into some of our data, the types of enterprises that we have looked at, people that are just selling food or a food product, people that are processing food, preparing and selling food, and processing. And there are different types of processing here. There's also, we looked at manual processing, and we looked also at mechanical processing, where people are using maybe electric grinders or even a food processor that uses electricity. But we also looked at manual, where people were really using like human power to to process the food. So it's a wide variety of enterprises that we have looked at. And this data that I'm looking at the moment is only from the surveys and not from the in-depth interviews that we conducted. So you see that 72% of the total sample is active in food preparation and selling, and 67% of them in food preparation and selling are actually women-owned enterprises within our sample. Okay, one key issue that we found, and that is very obvious when you are in the informal food sector, is that all these enterprises are highly dependent on energy. So in an urban setting, it's very important to note that these enterprises are not only going to use a single source of energy, they are going to use a wide variety of energy sources. But unlike those that are in the rural areas, they actually also have options and choices, and where possible and where they can afford, can use modern energy services as well. So also energy use is also determined by several contextual factors, as how we have found that costs play a role, or the type of energy source that is used as well, the type of food that is prepared because of flavor and customer preferences. So people that are running businesses in this sector also take that into consideration. The location of the enterprise also plays a role in the type of energy source that is going to be used, the local regulations. So these are the local authorities which determine what kind of energy sources that can be used by people. So as I mentioned earlier, we found that these micro enterprises, or these small enterprises, use multiple energy sources. And this is the type of findings that when you look at household energy and literature, you find that households in low-income areas, especially in the global south, use multiple energy sources. So the whole issue, or the whole concept of the energy ladder, really doesn't hold true for this sector, just as much as it doesn't hold true for the low-income household sector. So people end up engaging in energy stacking, which is really a movement between traditional and modern energy services, so that they can fulfill their energy needs. So some factors that influence energy use, so I just pulled out just a few here, but we have analyzed more. People use different types of energy sources because it's the only option, because it's affordable, because of ease of use, easy to gather, and it's because it's fast. And there are many other reasons, but this is just to highlight what we have come up with in our data. I don't think I'll have enough time to go through all of my slides, but perhaps I can just express something about free basic electricity subsidies, whereby in South Africa, we found that these subsidies, which were meant for households, actually were quite important also in the informal food sector, because where we found that out of the sample that we are receiving the subsidies, 59% of them were women, and they said that they actually use these subsidies also to support their business as well. So it's quite important. So here I'm also just trying to highlight the importance of policy and the way that it also contributes to the informal food sector. And the main reason why I'm highlighting that is that when you go to policymakers, especially in the energy sector, and you tell them about, or you talk to them about the informal food sector, they're like, no, that is not our, we don't play a role in that, go to the business development department. And then you get moved from pillar to post because they don't think that they should be playing a role in that, or they don't recognize the importance of energy in this sector, or how they can actually contribute to that. Yeah, just to highlight also the importance of free basic electricity. so they 37% of those said it encouraged them to start their businesses, and those that rely on these subsidies to survive, 85% of those were women. But this is just particularly for this South African sample that we got during our interviews. Okay, so another questions that we were asking is that, can the street food sector benefit from a policy and regulation integrated approach? Of course it can, like I was explaining. With regards to energy access and policy, there are also other issues that are surrounding energy use, or especially within the informal food sector. And there is a need for different departments, entities to actually talk to each other, and in that way, there could be, betterment of how energy is actually used in this sector, and how growth can then be promoted within this sector. It's now been 13 minutes of my presentation. I will stop there, and I look forward to questions from you. And later, perhaps we can just go into the other issues that I would have liked to raise. Thank you.
Thank you, Tabi. That was amazing. And thank you for keeping track of your time too. I just wanted to comment before going into the Q&A how interesting it was to see, different examples in your presentation, particularly how subsidies for electrification do have actually a positive impact, versus what we had seen or heard in as another example in Mariëlle's, on how subsidies weren't only available to those who had already means. While in the case of South Africa, it seems that it is actually supporting a broader financial development. So with that note, I would like to get started with the Q&A. And Mariëlle, as you were the first one to speak today, I would like to get started with you. I have a question that maybe you and I need to untangle a little, but it reads as follows. What are some of the policy recommendations for gender-aware European urban energy policy now in this era of refugee crisis? Have you seen, spotted, or could you imagine specific recommendations and policies for urban settings now that there is a different type of migration in the continent?
Yes, thank you, Anna, and thank you whoever raised that question, because it's a very important one and a very urgent one that is starting to be on the radar of energy policy makers in the European Union. One of the key things I like to stress in my gender research is that gender is not gender is a dynamic concept, and you need to look from it from an intersectional perspective. And using that intersectionality gives opportunities and opens the mind for looking at different users and different end users, like refugees or people who are coming from a different country or are immigrating, etc. At the moment, I can't recall that there is currently research. Well, there's research going on this topic, but no publications yet and no findings yet. There are colleagues working in the water sector, focusing on access to water and refugees in an urban setting and from resilience perspective. And I think those lessons can be learned and adapted in the energy sector. So yes, so again, one of my recommendations would be the policymakers is to learn from other sectors, like in the water sector, and use an intersectionality approach in raising this issue. But that's more I can't add at the moment, unfortunately. But it's a very important issue that needs more research, and definitely agree with that.
Thank you, Mariëlle. I know it's just something that we're getting started in facing. So indeed, research is absolutely necessary. David, I want to ask you to unmute yourself, and we've received quite a number of questions regarding the model for the pilot. So bear with me because I'm going to try and compile them all together. So the questions range from first, if the customers connected by a ready board, if they can extend the cables from it to other parts of their house to provide for light or electricity appliances. That's one. And then it's followed by a series of questions. First, thanking you for the great presentation, and then asking if you can give us idea of the cost of the ready boards, where does assemble, if they were assembled in Jamaica, or if most of the supplies if you got most of the supplies locally, and finally, how much did people pay for the ready board, and did the utility pay something? So if you could help us figure out a bit more about the financials of it, the capacity of the ready box, and the assembly line, that would be great.
Yeah, no problem, Maria. Thanks for the questions, everyone. So first of all, the ready board itself, as you saw in the image, has one safety light on it, and that has an LED bulb inside, so it's supposed to be very low consumption. And then there is included in the package that's given to the household an extension cord with another safety light at the end of it. So I don't know if you've ever seen when a mechanic works on the underside of your car, they often have a safety lamp that they can hook to a piece of the suspension, and that helps illuminate. Well, that would be the same kind of concept. I can't remember exactly, I'm thinking it's about 4 or 5 meters of line that you would have, so that you can extend from the ready board to either a second room, or if you're concerned about safety on the outside, you could put it potentially outside. And again, that's an LED bulb that's included in that package. In terms of the cost, you know, when things are run through development projects, they often tend to balloon. But so we don't have an exact cost estimate for the way that we produced it. We might be able to say that the components that went into this, these were all components that are available here on island at your average store, hardware store, and with the exception of a few things where we thought the standard needs to be a bit higher, and so we made a special order of circuit boards, for example, that had a higher safety rating. So those came from the U.S. with a higher standard to them. So we might be able to estimate around the cost of $250, $300 as they are constructed by us. The assembly was done through the University of Technology here in Kingston, and so that was mainly assembly by electrical engineering students. We tried to make sure that some of those students were also coming from the Majestic Gardens area, and there was, it's hard to estimate, maybe 15 to 20% female composition of that assembly team. We'd like to see that go higher, but I think already the 15 to 20% is an encouraging sign, considering that here in Jamaica, higher education is being taken up much more quickly by females rather than males. If you look at the number of degrees that are being awarded, it's about a 70-30 split right now for females to males. So I think that's only going to get better and better as time goes by, so that more women get involved in, you know, more of the technical and the manual trades. in terms of who paid for the board itself, there was a small contribution asked from the householder as they signed up to be customers. I think it was around 25 to 30, the equivalent of 25 to 30 US dollars, if I'm not mistaken. That was meant to kind of partly offset the cost, but mainly just to kind of show a bit of buy-in by the household. And I guess just to give you a reference, I believe we estimated something like a monthly income of around $120 to $200 in the community. So $25 is significant, but it's a one-time charge. And then, of course, going forward, they are going to be paying for credit. So the utility did not actually pay for any of the boards, but they had to build out all of the infrastructure that goes into this informal community of Majesty Gardens. So all of the power lines, the transformers, and a lot of the all the transformers are meant to be anti-theft as well, so that if you opened up and tried to tap in and tried to illegally take electricity, that would immediately send a warning sign back to the headquarters, and it would also cut off the electricity for 8 or 10 of your neighbors. The sense is that this would be kind of a social pressure to prevent people from continuing to attempt to do the fairly dangerous and illegal practice of tapping into the electrical line. So I hope that helps answer some of the more technical questions, and I'm happy to go further if it's necessary.
It does. Thank you a lot. Appreciate it. Claire, I do have a question. Well, I have several questions for you, but I'm just going to share one with you at the moment. It goes as follows. It is interesting to see how you now focus more on women after seeing their performance as sales agents. Can you say anything on women sales agents being empowered as well? For example, if there's an improvement in status, their position within the household and the economy, and if they are, or what it is that they may be commenting on.
Yeah, great question, thanks. I did talk a lot about the products, obviously, in the sales, and not so much about the empowerment. But that is a key part of what we do, both in terms of attempting to support women in developing as people and professionals, but also helping them to be the most successful sales agents, get the most income that they can by removing the obstacles that stand in their way. So actually what we did was this year, when we introduced really some women-specific programming, we actually asked what they would want support on in order to overcome those barriers. And the things that they mentioned were work-life balance, time management, and financial management. So those are things that we cover in group mentoring. And we also, in our training, we do focus on confidence and decision-making. So we have seen that the biggest aspect of like a major feedback from trainees and from the women that we train is that they gain in confidence. We don't have clear insight into how they relate that to their family dynamics or the dynamics with the men in their household. That's not something that we've really looked into. But anecdotally, we have had a lot of qualitative feedback on the fact that women feel more empowered, they are making more household decisions, and also that they have their own income and that they can do with that income what they please. One key thing that we also do is we have a savings program. So 10% of what everyone earns is kind of saved for them by livelihoods, which means that that's not money that they take home and that can be spent by someone else. So they have the power to use that money as they wish, to invest in something, to use it in times of emergency, or just buy something for themselves or their families. So women's empowerment certainly is one of the key ways that we are successful as an organization. I hope that provides some insight into that, but I'm happy to elucidate more or maybe share some documents that we have that talk about that, if that would help.
Thank you. I do think you've explained and answered the question, but still, if there are documents that you would like for us to share with the audience, we can also do that either through the chat box or afterwards. So think about it and let us know if you want us to help distribute additional information. Okay. And Tabby, I wanted to ask you to reflect slightly more on your presentation. And when you were closing, you said that there were some elements you wanted to reflect a little bit further. And I don't want to cut you from doing that. So perhaps you would like to share with us a little bit of those insights that due to time constraints you had not been able to share.
Okay, Anna, thank you very much for that opportunity. So what I wanted to just highlight is that with our research, as I mentioned, we had set out to do research on energy use in the informal food sector, but a whole lot of other issues came up, as you can imagine, within the informal food sector that were also very important because they touched on the gender issues. One of them is that of women's aspirations to grow within this sector. And we found this to be very important to mention, and we've recently also written a paper about it, because when you go into literature about the informal sector, you find that it's also divided into two by some authors, survivalist oriented and growth oriented. And women are usually placed on the survivalist oriented, and it's said about them that they really don't have aspirations to grow. They are on the survival mode. It's a hand-to-mouth kind of picture that is painted. While on the other hand, we thought, okay, let's hear what people have to say that are within this sector and those that are regarded as survivalists. Do they have aspirations to grow at all? And if not, why not? And if yes, what is it that they would like to grow into, or their enterprises would like to be, what they see themselves in the future? And we found that yes, actually, the enterprises, whether they were owned by men or women that are informal, they did have aspirations to grow, and they would like to expand to, the growth for them is defined by many things, like the expansion of the products that they are offering, the increase in the type of equipment that they are using. And when we ask them, okay, what are the barriers? What is it that constrains you from growing? One of the main things that came out was no access to capital. Now, when we did our analysis, we found that usually these informal enterprises, they are seen as not growth oriented, and therefore no resources go into them. And usually because this sector is dominated by women, especially in the African continent. I know in Asia is different, but the informal food sector is dominated by women, especially in the countries where we were working. So if you avoid or if you ignore that this sector actually has aspirations to grow, it means that you are ignoring a whole lot of women that do have aspirations to grow. But the only thing is that they do not have access to capital. Now, if you don't know about these aspirations to grow, how are you going to invest in this sector? So these are the issues that I wanted to raise. And of course, we have made some draft policy messages from the study, and there are quite a lot of those. I could share with the audience also my slides after this.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Ntabi. And yes, it would be great if we could also use those slides to when we're uploading the PDF version of your presentation. I'm conscious about the time, and I want to take the opportunity then to share one question that's addressed to everyone or none of you. I'm not sure exactly how the answer is going to end up being, but it reads as follows. It says, have any of you analyzed public spaces, energy and gender? So for example, what are the interactions of women and men, girls and boys, in terms of parks, streets, public libraries, markets? It's more of an urban planning and gender angle question. So I wonder if any of you has done research on it or would like to share research they know of.
Can I go first?
Yes, of course.
Yes, it's Ntabi. We have looked at what influences people's use of space as the informal food enterprises. I don't know if this will answer this question, but what we have found is that people choose the location where their enterprise is situated based on a variety of issues. So it may be, I mean, for women, it was closer to home, so that they could also be able to take care of the home while they were also running their business. It was also one of the issues as well was that it was close to the customers. Or another answer was that it was allocated to them perhaps by the local authority. So I don't know if that question's answer with regards to the location and space and the way space is used and the way people interact in it, men and women.
I do think it gives an answer to one of the so many different and possible angles to it. I want to know, perhaps, Mariëlle, if you... Oh, okay, Claire, I see you've texted, so maybe I'll ask you to join the line and share with us the experience that you're writing about. Claire, are you...
Yeah,
can you unmute yourself?
sorry.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, no, I was actually answering a different question that came through on the sorry about that.
Okay, but do you have any experiences from your work that you've, even if it's just I've lost the word in English, apologies, but if you've seen patterns or that jump to your head in terms of how the women and men in the communities that you work may use or approach public spaces?
Not really. I mean, that's not an area that I would be able to say we had much expertise at all. I mean, one thing I can add, I guess, from our personal experience is that we send sales agents out into the streets. So we are a street-based sales force. And, you know, one thing that we try to make sure is that sales agents go out in groups in terms of safety, in terms of being able to engage with the right people. You know, it's generally women that we're appealing to. And generally urban slums are not very female-friendly places. But I don't see any, I mean, certainly in Kenya, there's not much engagement of community or the grassroots, there's not much engagement at the grassroots level in terms of any urban planning or public spaces, so to speak. I would say that that's definitely something that is lacking in order to optimize those infrastructure and the potential for promising interactions in that respect.
Thank you. And David, again, in your work on informal settings, you were commenting at least about the lack of public light and how that is affecting security, or even, you know, how security is affected or could be improved by phone services. Are there any other examples that you can think of from your work on how you see spaces or energy interacting differently and affecting the life of women and men differently?
I think of here in Jamaica, music is extremely important. And so almost anywhere where there's going to be a little bit of a public hangout space, whether this is done by the urban authorities or it's just kind of done informally, because almost all space is created informally in these kind of slums, there has to be music, and there have to be very large, loud speakers. And of course, those sound systems require electricity to run. I'm trying to look for a statistic. I think something like 68 to 70% of householders said that they used electricity to power a sound system of some sort, whether that's going to only reverberate within their shack or it's going to spill out into the street and create kind of an attraction for other people to come hang out. I don't know whether we've seen really how that interaction or how that music is influenced by men or women. You know, who are the DJs, who's deciding what music gets played, or who feels more comfortable coming out to hang out on the stoop when the music is playing. But I think it would be an interesting one to study if we looked into it further, and especially as people are now legitimizing the electricity, and someone now has to pay for the power that goes into that system. And it would be interesting to see who then makes the decision about what gets played, because of course now someone has to pay for it. So interesting. It would be an interesting study. So if anyone wants to do their PhD and come down here to Jamaica, we can talk about it.
I'm pretty sure you'll be receiving some requests quite soon. Mariëlle, I want to pose the same question to you, and I believe you may know about one or two examples here in Europe.
Thank you, Anna, for the opportunity to react as well. I know a couple of pilots in both in the Netherlands and the European Union on urban planning and integrating different uses of, for example, libraries, but also parks and sport fields, where it's not only where they are not only looking at, for example, intergenerational use. So, for example, playgrounds are in the Netherlands more used by grandparents and their grandchildren than parents and children. So, for example, then they add elements for the grandparents to do some sport activities with their grandchildren, or adding more barbecues areas to public places for those families, especially from migrant communities that would like to use public places and public spaces in a different way than, for example, the Dutch people. So yes, there are a couple of initiatives in that sense that are really interesting to look at, and yeah, it would be nice to have more overview and to have more knowledge about those findings as well.
Thank you, Mariëlle. And well, I'll have you on the line, as I know it's time for us to start closing this webinar, unfortunately. I wanted to ask you if you could share with us your takeaway message, that one thing we should not forget after having listened to your presentation.
Yes, thank you for that opportunity. To me, the most important thing is, if developing gender-aware energy policies, to be aware of the fact that gender is a dynamic and a socially constructed concept that needs to be involved in intersectionality with different groups, ages, backgrounds, etc., and that men and women are not dealt with as a given concept. So the intersectionality of that approach is really something I would like to encourage policymakers to have a look at. Thank you.
Thank you. And David, if you could share with us that takeaway message, an idea you want us to have?
Well, I think it would certainly be around data collection from the very beginning of a project, especially data relating to productive uses of electricity and of course, the street safety issues that have already been talked about here. I mean, I think that way we can better measure the socioeconomic impacts of the increased energy access in safe and legal electricity. And we can make sure that those impacts are measured for all genders. And we can ensure that we're really designing our programs in the future so that they really hit all the genders equally.
Thank you. And Claire, if you could share with us your takeaway message, please.
Yeah, so I already mentioned, I think, in my short presentation that if we leave women out of any project that we think has a developmental goal, then we are shooting ourselves in the foot. And I think that I would say that would go down to every stage, from the planning to the implementation to the monitoring and the data collection. We need to consult at every phase. At Livelihoods, everything we do is based on consultation and feedback from the ground up, both from customers and from the people that we're training. So without that sort of consultation, you can find yourself going in an academically informed direction, but not necessarily an informed direction given the context that you're working in.
Thank you. And Tabby, your takeaway message, if you please.
Okay, and of course for me it will be in line with the informal food sector, the street food sector. And what I would like to say is that energy use in the informal food sector is influenced by a number of factors such as regulations, location, cost of energy, and the type of enterprise. And in that, it's so important for us to consider the gender factors by acknowledging that access and use of energy by men and women can determine the success or failure of enterprises in the informal food sector. Therefore, policies that don't consider the informal food sector miss out on critical opportunities to address gender issues where energy use is concerned.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank you, you and all the other panelists for sharing with us today your knowledge and your experiences. I want to invite our participants or audience to tune in to our next webinar, which is going to be focusing quite strongly on entrepreneurship towards the end of June, and we'll be alerting you about the final time and date when we're closer to it. We want to thank USAID for their support in the initiative and making this webinar series possible, and remind you all that the video and the presentations are going to be made available online relatively shortly. So bear with us. We're downloading the information and we'll let you know when these are available. So from our side, it's been a pleasure to be today with all of you, and we want to wish you a great rest of the day. Thank you very much for listening in and for participating. Have a great day.